Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. DMGeezerjim here. I am picking up my classic module and setting series for YouTube as well. We're looking at two OG classics, EX1 and EX2. EX1 is called Dungeonland. EX2 is the Land Beyond the Magic Mirror. These were actual adaptations of Beyond the Magic Mirror and Alice in Wonderland set up for Dungeons and Dragons, written by Gary Gygax back in the day. Back in yon times, we're looking at a publication date of 1983 and 1984, 83. Both of them were released in 1983. They're designed as a series of modules. Now, these are first edition Dungeons and Dragons AD&D. There's a lot of lore information given within the dungeons in regards to how they were designed and how they were incorporated at the publication time. The modules were originally designed to go into Castle Greyhawk. Castle Greyhawk being the 28 plus level dungeon that Gygax and his crew had made outside of the city of Greyhawk in the setting of Earth. The concept was these were paradimensions, similar to what we talk about with Domain of Dread nowadays. Basically, it's just a Dungeons and Dragons version of a lot of the stories and a lot of the little stuff in Alice in Wonderland. That's the shortest way to describe it. The two modules were designed to be played together to play through the Alice in Wonderland from a Dungeons and Dragons setup. Now, this is AD&D first edition. Characters levels 9 through 12 is considered intermediate to high level play. So that also carried through here. Now, a couple things as we get into it. Again, these were released very, very early in Dungeons and Dragons product cycles. You had 79, 80, when the first BECMI, the big boxes in the AD&D came out. These were released within 3 years of those. So, we look at stuff nowadays. It's like Wizards has teams of hundreds of people working on 3 books a year. And back then you had a team of 5 people working on a product every 2 years. Well, honestly, they put a lot of crap in the same time period, so keep that in mind. But yeah, so Dungeonland is set up to be the first part of the adventure. The Land Beyond Magic Mirror is the second part of the adventure. Couple caveats is they were designed to work together. They were designed to be played in sequence. No, not really even in sequence. Honestly, the way the two modules are put together, either of them is technically a start point leading into the other one. There is one plot line that goes from Dungeonland to the Land Beyond Magic Mirror, but outside of that one plot line, that one event, the party can get approached either or. They can approach. That's why I'm presenting them together. Land Beyond the Magic Mirror and Dungeonland are two sides of the same coin. So before getting too far into it, first thing you got to keep in mind is the first thing I'm going to point out in regards to these products as content, they are not very well put together. The writing is a little bit I mean, Gygax is a genius as a game designer, but he was always lacking in his writing skill, and that becomes really evident in this module where he wrote the entire 2 parts from the beginning to end. So be prepared for poor structure when you pick up these modules. If you decide to play through these modules, if you're going to pick them up as a dungeon master, you definitely need to sit down with a notebook, spreadsheet, something to put it all together, because the way they're written, they do not make sense. They're poorly organized for immediate use. I guess that's a better way to say it. Once you've read them from beginning to end, and beginning to end again, and then kind of gone, if you're here, go there, if you're there, go here, you'll understand what I'm saying. It's very difficult to describe until you've read the actual dungeon. For example, Land Beyond the Magic Mirror is all written in preface to entering the magic house or exiting the magic house, whereas the reality of it is your party may not have even gone into the house. If they're coming in from from Dungeonland, the house is on the outside. If they're coming in from a magic mirror situation, then they're coming from the inside of the house. You know, whatever their approach is, whether they're starting in the long fall down the earthen well into the diminution tunnel, or they're coming through a magic mirror into the modernized wizard's house, it's two separate starts, it's two separate modules. So yeah, be prepared for that. Depending on how you want to start your adventure, you may have them falling down and doing the shrinky shrink, and or you may have them going through the magic mirror coming out on the other side. Your option as a dungeon master will best fit. Now, I don't want to make the mistake of describing these as drop-in, drop-out modules. Dungeonland, Land Beyond the Magic Mirror are not short adventures. I would say the two of them together would probably be about 14 encounters, anywhere between 12 and 20 encounters, depending how thorough you are and how thorough your group is between the two modules. So, I mean, it's going to be a 5 to 7 session short adventure, long adventure, short campaign, as it were. So one of the caveats that I want to kind of get into here a little bit is when we're talking about this thing, back in the day versus 5th edition. And that's kind of what the bend is how do we use this stuff for 5th edition? First and foremost, there was a level of secrecy that existed between dungeon masters and players in the classic era. The players didn't necessarily know exactly what they were playing, even if they saw the cover. It wasn't readily available. If one of my players didn't go buy this module, they didn't know what was in it until we played through it. Whereas in 5th edition, you're a Google search away, a wiki search away from knowing every stat block of every monster and every position in any dungeon. It is what it is. So there's a big difference in the information dissemination. So the writer of the module actually really talked at great length about making sure that you are, in fact, being secretive about the module. Not like lying to your party, but kind of ease them into it, kind of trick them into getting into the module, you know? Kind of don't let them know they're about to go into Alice in Wonderland. Don't let them know they're about to go beyond the land, beyond the magic mirror. There's gonna be enough obvious stuff pretty quickly to kind of get them. Is this? No, he wouldn't. Wow, we are great. And your mileage is going to vary. Your group's excitement will vary based on how they feel about the idea of Alice in Wonderland. So, adaptation for 5th edition, first and foremost, I think it's important to maintain the secrecy. These are para-elemental planes, para-dimensions, quasi-planes, similar to Domain of Dread. It doesn't have to exist in any sort of rhyme or reason. It's its own place. So you can take your party there through the shrouded mists of Ravenloft if you want. Again, they could be falling down the rabbit hole, so to speak. You know, literally, it's what they, you know, the endless shaft. Maybe you have a floor collapse out of them in the middle of a dungeon that they weren't even expecting, and they begin falling endlessly. Suddenly it seems as if your fall is slowed, as if feather spell has been cast on you. A second thing, and a third, and a fourth thing when it comes time to run these modules. Dungeon masters, referees, whatever you want, whatever game you're administering, read this and reread this. I cannot stress enough, you're going to have to spend some time and effort making sure that you are, in fact, aware of the sequence of events. The structure of the modules is not very good. Plan on taking a lot of notes. You know, this one, Dungeonland, was written kind of from the idea of the beginning to the end. Here's a simple thing, the long haul first view. This is a complete perspective and paradigm shift that we have to be prepared to put our parties in and make it feel mystical, make it feel confusing without making it feel unfair, if that makes sense to you. There's going to be a lot of that. You'll have that theme kind of running in here. If you've been running a lot of 5th edition, I'm going to tell you straight up, 5th edition coddles the players. 5th edition holds their hands, builds them up to be superheroes. Every group in 5th edition is supposed to be the Avengers. Whether that's by game design or that's the expectation of the group, it is what it is. So playing in some older content, there's a lot of insta-death situations. There's a lot of if they do this, then they die type of a situation. That might rub some of your players the wrong way. So keep that in mind. Keep the context of the adventure and the design difficulty in mind. If your players are the kind of people that we are superheroes, we're never going to die, we're always going to win, don't even bother with Dungeonland, or maybe let them do it as a dream sequence or something. Because in order to preserve the ooh ah wow factor of it, there has to be that strangeness and that lethality that does not exist in 5th edition. I'm going to rephrase that again. 5th edition does not have true lethality for the player characters. Unless their characters are suicidal or you're cheating as a dungeon master, it's really, really hard to kill players. So keep that in mind. Whereas in 1st edition, it's really, really easy to kill players. Again, so your first encounter is the long hallway. This is talking as you walk in, you fall into the room, they've come into the space. They see this scene described in front of them. The box text is there, and you describe this scene to them. And here's the kicker. If at this point the party does not rivet their attention upon the table and the small doorway, if they're not instantly focused, which is kind of hard for us as a dungeon master because you're going to cure them. Is everyone looking at the table? And most of the time your players are going to be, oh yeah, sure, why not? So that goes away. So you've got to find a balance point in this first presentation. This is an example of a lot of steps in the module. This first moment of presentation, the long hall, is kind of an indicator of how you're going to administer the adventure as a dungeon master and how the players are going to be expected to play. If they ask any question about the room other than what's on the table, what are we paying attention to, then, you know, if they that's what you're looking for. So you've described the room. The walls are paneled in some sort of glowing wood. The reddish material is well cared for and polished to a lustrous finish that reflects the flame from the candles. 5 doors made of the same wood are on either side of the hall, and a pair of great double doors sits at its far end. Just a few feet from your vantage point, atop the pile of rubbish, you notice a small, finely crafted table. Don't read the parentheses. Upon its crystal top rests a metal object, a flagon of some sort, and a salver with an unleavened loaf atop it. This is Gary Gygax trying to play with the thesaurus. A plate with flatbread on it is what that is. Nothing else is visible except a small portal beyond the table. The doorway is about 1 foot tall and half as wide. It's closed by a door bound with metal. The ceiling overhead is arched and beamed. The rafters are some 15 foot above. The arch is another 10 above that. So I would honestly, if you want to ensure that, make sure you're changing up how you're reading this thing if you want to drive your party to focus on something. They're going to focus most of the time on either what's super interesting in them as an individual or the last thing you kind of read. So it's like you're talking about this table and the small door, and then you switch gears and talk about the ceiling. So it's like your party's almost trapped at that point into looking around the room and failing this first step. This is the drink me, eat me thing. Drink me and you go small, eat me, you get big. Each member of the party who drinks from the flagon will shrink to 1/10 their normal size. The loaf causes growth to 10 times normal size. There's only enough for each party member to receive 1 portion of each item. Of course, one character can test the effects of each and leave enough so all members of the party may benefit. Both properties of diminution and growth are such that only living things are affected. All clothing, armor, and weapons will fall off and remain the party if the party chooses to pass into the area beyond the door. Okay? So we're taking all the gear and all the stuff and everything off of our party right out the gate to begin with. Here we go with that. So yeah, first and foremost, that's an issue. I need to figure out what's up with my Twitch. I don't think I'm getting notifications out. That's weird. Apologies there. But it doesn't matter. I'm recording. So that leads back to the first step here when they're falling down the endless shaft. And I'm going to try to avoid going page by page because we'll be sitting here for 4 hours of this recording. I want to avoid doing that. But at the same time, just some examples of what you need to prepare for as a dungeon master. When they're falling down this shaft, the endless shaft that starts it, it talks about no magical work in the shaft, so any attempt to cast spells while falling to the starting point will simply burn the magic. They'll use the slots, but it doesn't do anything. If any party member has a lantern, he or she will note the miniature rooms line the walls. Any kind of light source, it says, except for improvision. which is dark vision nowadays. So you know, that's kind of a fun thing. Your whole group is we all have dark vision. We don't need light. Well, they're effed. They're absolutely effed in the end of the shaft. Keep that in mind as your DM. That's kind of something to keep in mind whether you're doing this module or any other module. Know your group. If your group has everyone's running dark vision, they don't have any sort of lights, they don't run with it. You have the choice here of doing something to let them see this and having a chance, or saying, okay, you wanted a meta through the Out of the Abyss with dark vision being thing, now you get punished here because you don't use light sources. Up to you as a dungeon master. That's knowing your group. But anyway, as they're floating down this tunnel, they'll see tiny little dioramas reflecting moments of their life. You can have a lot of fun in a dungeon master here and talk about as you're floating by, you see a little you see a diorama of the scene when you fought this or when you were stealing that or whatever. Now the party has a chance to reach in and grab an item. These items are super duper duper tiny, and they're useless on their own. But if the party actually eats the diminution drink, then all of a sudden the random pieces of armor, weapons, magic items, etc. they're finding during the fall down the shaft suddenly matter. So keep in mind, you are taking away all of their weapons, armor, and clothing the moment they either drink from the flask or eat of the flatbread. You're either going to grow or you're going to shrink. Just like the Alice in Wonderland type of a thing, right? So if they didn't pay attention, if they asked any questions about the room other than what the initial step was, they're now shifted into a different thing. And this is a big thing for both modules. You have got to be ready as a dungeon master to instantaneously shift gears and say, you're not seeing that anymore. This is what it is now. Wait, it doesn't matter. Keep moving forward. It's an alternate reality. It's messing with the players' minds. It's messing with their heads. It's Alice in Wonderland, straight up. There's nothing normal about it. So these kind of things, you know. The pool of tears is, so if they don't go to the door, then it changes up. There's a potential for combat encounter. One thing I have to make sure to emphasize for both of these modules is there's a lot of spells that will not function, and that's part of it is to preserve the mystique and the strangeness of the game world. If you have meta players in your group, be careful, be ready. They're going to scream about every single one of these spells not working, but be prepared for it. Now, here's the flip side of it. A lot of these are first edition, so you might have to twinker around and find Animal Summoning, Cacodemon, Call Lightning, Call Woodland Beings, Chariot of Sistar, Conjure Animals, Conjure any elementals, Control Weather, Creeping Doom, Dimension Door, Fly, Gate, Levitate, Monster Summoning, Pass Plant, Pass Wall, Plant Control, Plant Door, Teleport, Transport with Plants, Windwalk, X-Ray, and Weather Summoning. Very quickly, you're realizing that the spells that are banned or that won't work, they're non-functioning magic. They're summoning spells, bringing in creatures from not of this world because you're in a para-elemental plane. You're a quasi-plane. Your summoning doesn't work here. Pass wall, anything that can make a door, a wall easy to traverse, anything that make the plants under control are no-nos here. The magic doesn't work. Furthermore, it talks towards the end of the module that you should, as a dungeon master back in the day, they talked about consider giving everything in the dungeon 25% magic resistance to true up the fact that it exists in this strange world for so long. 5th edition terms, that means maybe some of your bosses, I won't say bosses, some of the more interesting characters that the party's going to run into should have an advantage on save versus magic to kind of duplicate that ability to deal well with magic. So we've got the shaft. Again, couple things that you're challenged as a dungeon master. Pay attention to what your party's doing as you describe this fall. You may feel generous and say, as you're floating around, looking around aimlessly, you notice this die. If they don't ask, what's the floor, what's the ceiling, what are we doing? I want to throw, if they're doing anything other than looking around them, they may miss all of that itemization. This is the hardcore stuff with 1st edition. So the tiny garden pops in as well. Okay, that's a little bit later. So if your dudes have eaten one thing, they get to go through the one area. If they drink and get shrunk, they get to go in the tiny garden. This is a crazy, weird thing full of magic water, talking plants, snapdragon plants that try to eat people, bull thistles, silvery stinky bushes. Basically, at this point, the garden is alive. While they're in the tiny garden, and if you're wondering, let's get to some visuals real quick before we get too far in. The mapping, in my opinion, leaves something to be desired for this game, for this release, for these modules. You get a regional map based on hexagonal movement, 50 feet. Man, you could have given me some smaller area maps for each of those. 50 feet is not that big of a deal, but at the same time, the game text would lead you to believe that this is a hex crawl, that it's taking them 3 turns to go through, like, for example, to go through 2 hexes of wood, supposed to take them 3 hours. That's 100 feet. So maybe you have some super dense magical wood that the dudes are cutting through and you have to duplicate that, or the scale of the map. In my opinion, I go with the idea the scale of the map is bad. It's a really piss poor scale for the amount of stuff that's going on. I mean, this goes back to me as a dungeon master. I think about line of sight, think about areas of contact, and most people can see across flat terrain for several hundred feet. So it's like when you get to here, you see what's going on. So that's my personal opinion. The area maps need some work. I would plan on building my own map or just going theater of the mind and adjusting distances. They give you a palace for the off with their head, the Queen of Hearts, Queen of Hearts, Queen of Tarts, all that kind of thing. That's going on in this part of the adventure as well. So you've got a cool map for the palace, but it's not very well fleshed out. You got 1 level. You could go up, you could go down. There's a lot of different things that will happen. So all the love for Gygax, but the adventure aids, the maps that came with this are very, very lacking. They're enough. Plan on getting either doing some mapping or going completely theater of the mind. Likewise with the tiny garden, it's like they flip from hex to square, just trying to be, which is interesting because this early on in 82, 83, hexagonal grids were reserved for outdoor, large scale transit, the hex crawl concept. So it's interesting to see Gygax using hexes alongside squares for the typical maps. As Dungeon Master, does it matter? Not necessarily, aside from the fact that if you're playing 5th edition and you're using a battle grid, does not translate to hexagonal movement. Hard to figure out north, south, east, west, flanks, and all that. Personally, as an old school wargamer, I prefer hexes. Hexes give you better arcs of fire, better angles of cover, all that kind of, but I'm not going to argue that. So, you're going to have to do some work to get these old, especially this series, up to par. The visual aids are a little bit lacking. The maps are bare bones at best. This is the long haul that we were talking about earlier. When they first dropped in, if they're looking at the table and the small door, this room stays the way it is and they move through the small door. If they look anywhere else, it becomes the big room and they've got to swim across all of this water with all such creatures in there. Okay? The next thing I really want to emphasize is there are a lot of recurring non-player characters in here. The Smilodon cat, the giant dogs. There is a Jabberwocky. You have the Queen of Hearts, the Duchess, the Mad Hatter, the hare, the crazed hare, White Rabbit, Carlodos, the March Hare. The March Hare is represented here. You've got the Rock, the Jabberwocky, the Walrus, and the Carpenter. The mutated dragon turtle, the king and the queen of croquet, playing croquet. A lot of that stuff is represented here, guys, including one last thing of, the Queen of Hearts. She made some tarts on a summer day. The Knave of Hearts, he stole those tarts and took them quite away. There's an entire adventure sequence, an entire encounter sequence based on that simple little limerick, that little nursery rhyme. So I do have to tip my hat and give credit where it's due. The writer did a good job of incorporating a lot of the high points from Alice in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass into these modules. So in addition to managing strange visual tricks, which is what we have to do with the endless shaft, the long hallway, the tiny garden, A lot of this is managing the presentation of the setting to surprise your characters, to surprise your players, and kind of get them into the moment, as it were. Managing their views so where something twists on them, they don't feel like they've gotten screwed. They don't feel like you're not playing fair, even though truthfully we're not playing fair. But you still want it to have that mystique and that wonder. Again, that's going to come through reading this module, rereading this module, sitting down with an Excel spreadsheet or a WordPad or whatever your preferred note-taking method is, and kind of restructuring it into something more accessible. Because the way it's laid out, the party may not go from A to B, from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, and then you've also got a lot of alphanumeric switches in between here and there. The wood of trees and giant fungi. There's a bee here that hangs out around here. The big old, like the caterpillar hanging out smoking the pipe. We got the same thing kind of going on here. Sorry here. But okay, so anyway, let me continue on with this recording for a few more minutes here. Yeah, we're focused on Dungeonland at this moment. Dungeonland is EX1, X2 is Land Beyond the Magic Mirror. I honestly think Dungeonland is the better of the two. It's a little bit more complete. Some people like the Land Beyond the Magic Mirror because they get to play in future technology. When they come through the Magic Mirror, they're sitting in a contemporary person's house. Again, if you're looking at it as a modern player, it's not that contemporary. You've got VHS. There's a VCR player sitting next to a color tube TV. Like, that's old. Well, back when '83, that was like ultra high new tech. So, be prepared. Maybe you switch it on over to deal with make DVR, whatever. We'll get to the Land Beyond in a second. But yeah, the Dungeonland is a trip. You have to be prepared to role play insane non-player characters, knowing that you have the advantage the entire time without dooming your players by their own attitudes, their own stupid. There's a lot of things. For example, they'll run into a group of flowers, talking flowers, and you're instructed as a dungeon master to insult them, to piss them off, to make them do something dumb, to incite an emotional response. So it's almost like you're going to, in a couple steps of these modules, you're going to be railroading your party into a conflict. Good to see you, Charlie. Yeah, thanks for dropping in. Yeah, we're looking at a couple of the older modules here. Dungeonland and Land Beyond the Magic Mirror. These were published in 1983 by Gary Gygax for AD&D. But yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. So this might be some useful content for you if you're just interested in adaptation. You can pick them up on DM's Guild for pretty cheap. There's other places to find them if you prefer other sources. But yeah, the titles are EX1, Dungeonlands, EX2, Lands Beyond the Magic Mirror. Charlie, you're asking, it's not as hard as you think it is, aside from the fact that we have to adjust for lethality. That's kind of what I was talking about here. You're in older Dungeons and Dragons, first edition, we were primarily theater of the mind. Back me for a second. Even if you're using miniatures to resolve a fight. We weren't setting out all of these massive terrains, virtual tabletop, all of that. So when you're playing in theater of the mind, you have a few more tricks to play with. The hardest part is adjusting the expectation. In first edition, most of these modules will tell you, don't let your players bring their favorite characters. They're probably going to die, yada, yada, yada. Whereas in 5th edition, everyone's a superhero. Every group is the Avengers. So there's a big shift in the danger level. The second shift is in the monsters. A lot of the difficulty in 5th edition is determined by action economy. Whereas back in the day, you would use 20 creatures to be a threat on the party. Nowadays, 20 creatures is not good. It's bad. There's a lot of different ways to balance. To kind of answer your question, Charlie, that depends on the level as well. Yeah, absolutely. Preparing for 5th edition is also preparing for specific level brackets. After level 10, you shouldn't even be using combat rating anymore. You should know the capabilities and the weaknesses of your party, and you really have to plan to offset their strengths and to take advantage of their weaknesses to give them a challenging fight. Part of that is the rules. Part of that's the expectation, though. So that's where kind of these kind of older modules are really kind of a good thing if you can get your party to buy into it. For example, the tiny garden has this flower baked grotto that's got it's just a little waterfall. Now, if your party drinks from the water, there's a chance that a potion effect on a table of 1 through 20 happens to them. If they try to bottle it and take it away, it doesn't happen. If they drink out of the pool, it doesn't happen. So there's lots of little bitty things that 5th edition will hand the players where this modules actually require them to think through. That's all I know, but like in Icewind Dale, it gives all the stuff about how extreme the weather could kill, and that negates it with cold weather clothing. Yeah, and the same thing can kind of go. That's a good point. You know, I talk about that on some of my other streams. Thanks for joining us, by the way. I'm here Monday through Friday, 10 noon till 2, just talking about D&D stuff, and then I do some gaming at night as well. But for example, you have Out of the Abyss. Most of your players, if you play Out of the Abyss module and you take a party of 4 Warforged, they don't have to worry about seeing in the dark. They don't have to worry about eating. They don't have to worry about drinking. They don't have to worry about sleeping. So all of a sudden, the entire expectation of survival is removed because players can offset that quickly with the race. So that changes the entire dynamic of the campaign, similar to what you're talking about with the Icewind Dale. So the plus side here is you're messing around in a paradimension. You're kind of like the domain of dread. Alice in Wonderland, Beyond Looking Glass, Beyond the Magic Mirror, all take place in their own dimension, their own pocket dimension. So we do get to play with some rule changes, as it were. That may be how it works in Faerun, but it doesn't work like that here. So the big challenges with Dungeonland, first and foremost, is making sure that you read it and reread it and reread it. It's written in such a way that it just lists locations from beginning to end. It doesn't necessarily account for the direction that the party's going to go. If you're reading it and expecting to run it as listed, you're going to have a hard time. Like I said, you need to go through this sucker, tear it apart, drop it back on a spreadsheet or whatever your notes your desire, so you can have a quicker reference. This module, some modules from some of the older classic modules are well written, as in you can go page by page and it'll take you through it. This one's you're cracking into a whopping 33 pages, including the maps. Old modules are small. They are very small. And if you're already running your own campaign, all you're doing is pulling ideas out of them. Yeah, so, but the understanding is you've got to know where your beginning is, where your end is, and how all of the stuff in the middle works. The presentation is the structure of the writing is not good. The content is great. That's what I'm definitely wanting to impart upon you. If you read this from beginning to end, it's not going to make sense as an adventure because it's written as a list of encounters. Yeah, that can be an issue with a lot of the 5th edition campaign books. You know, and if you catch my stuff over on YouTube as well, I've got a series that just detail these old modules, man. These old 30 to 40 page, 5 maps, 1 plot, 3 or 4 locations, and go whoop ass, have fun. What we try to call one shots and short adventures now. Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I'm a 5th edition dungeon master. I run. Charlie's asking if these are easy to install. Yes, I'm a 5th edition DM. I run 4 campaigns a week. I'm running 1 official 5th edition. Everything else is a composition of old content. We take all of these old modules and update them, and I run them with 5th edition rules. There are changes. Like I said, the action economy is a big thing. The difficulty factors are a significant thing to keep track of. The idea, what you got to remember is when D&D was written in 1st edition, 2nd edition, it was less about the collaborative story and more about the tactical experience, if that makes sense to you. Of course, role-playing was a big idea behind it, but it was a war game turned into a fantasy game. Now it's a fantasy role-play centered game, collaborative adventure nowadays. So yeah, you've got characters to deal with here. The Smilodon cat. You've got the Mad Hatter, the hare, all of the big things that are normal in Alice in Wonderland also exist in this module. So if you're a fan of the series, that's a great thing. If you're not a fan of the series, I would suggest watching a movie, picking up the book, just so you can kind of inhabit these non-player characters, because these are the dialogue points for the adventure. Your party's dealing with the Duchess in a good way, in an insane way. You've got the Cheshire Cat, who's now the Smilodon Cat, who floats through the world and you know, is kind of that maybe MacGuffin, maybe troublemaker for the party. Everything ultimately results in, you know, the Mad Hatter is, you're going to have to plan for him. He's got special abilities where he throws hats. Your party, back then it was sorry about that. No, it's okay, no worries. Appreciate you sitting through my ads. But yeah, for example, the Hatter, he's going to throw hats. And we're told here in first edition that the party, it's an automatic hit, that the party has a certain chance. They're not attacking armor class, or attacking dexterity. So for us in 5th edition, we would translate that into an athletics check to dodge the hat, or it's dex savings throw to dodge the hat rather than a 2-hit roll. And you'd make it difficult because some of these hats will drop down. For example, one drops Otto's Irresistible Dance. You could do Tasha's Hideous Laughter, something like that. A Hat of Imprisonment wraps the people up. Hats of Disguise. So the Mad Hatter's got some free shots with these crazy hats to land them on your party while they're sitting at his tea party. It starts out in a situation of a dialogue that quickly gets sideways. You've got to manage that as a DM, knowing where it's supposed to lead. And so he's just trying to incite a negative emotion. That way he gets away, and when everyone shows up in the Queen's Court, they just get to add that more charges to the fools. The Mad Hatter, the encounter with the Duchess, the Smilodon Cat, the Mad Hatter, these are all leading up to getting the party in trouble for when they actually sit down with the Queen in the palace. The Queen of Hearts, who made the tarts and all of that, and she's going to wig out and play the off with the heads game. And that's kind of the summation of the event. Now, that will lead you potentially into, this is where we're going to get a little bit tricky and a little bit confusing. The plot for Dungeonland, just in a couple sentences, your party finds themselves falling into Wonderland, into Dungeonland. They'll have several encounters along the way that will end in the finale, in the last battle with the Queen of Hearts in her palace, which might very well possibly end into a big old fight. You're not supposed to kill him. The whole thing is, there's a little bit of a trickery. The Prince of Hearts plants the tarts on 2 of the party characters, so they end up being charged with stealing it. Blows up into this whole sham trial, and as a dungeon master, you can have a lot of fun with that. You could lean more into the trial aspect at the palace and have a lot more fun with role play and dialogue, rather than it turning into this gigantic chaotic battle right off the bat. It's up to you. It's written to go into battle mode. And just keep in mind, if you pick up some old classics, you don't feel obligated to homebrew all of these monsters. The majority of them exist in 5th edition in their own way. Some of them you have to wiggle a little bit because we're given quick stat blocks from magic users. But for example, an assassin here is still an assassin in 5th edition. Pull the stat block for it. A griffin, upstat the griffin because this is a stone griffin, but point being, very rarely are you going to be in an issue in an instance that the creatures are a problem. A Weirrat in 1st is similar to a Weirrat in 5th. You may have to change the numbers of creatures, but not so much worry about the type of creature. Now, at the end of it, we'll kind of go through a little bit of a chat, pretty quick and easy to, if you need to use the stat block that's here, there's a method that takes about 30 seconds to translate a 1st edition stat block to a 5th edition stat block. It's not perfect. It's good enough to get you playing, I guess is the way I look at it. Oh shit, I didn't put a stat block up for the Halberdier. Men-at-Arms, armor class 5, that's going to be armor class 15. Level 0, that's going to be 2 hit dice. That's just a guard, baby. 6 hit points on 1 attack with hitting with a halberd. So it's a +2 to hit as a standard dude. Halberd, 1d10 +2, we're done. It's I want to make, I've done it a lot, so it's not hard for me, but it's really not hard to come up with a method to turn a stat block from 1st or 2nd or even 3rd. Well, 3rd's a little bit harder, not going to lie. But yeah, so you've got the King, the March Hare, the Mad Hatter, the Prince, the Queen, the Smilodon Cat, Charlados the White Rabbit, all the frog people, all of their friends, all the King's soldiers, and all the King's men, which will get us to Humpty Dumpty and Land Beyond the Magic Mirror. So, that's summing up Dungeonland, aka Wonderland. Land Beyond the Magic Mirror is designed to go along with it, whereas Dungeonland can lead to Land Beyond, or Land Beyond can lead to Dungeonland. That's where I say you really got to read it take some notes and kind of put it together to get the two to really work well. Again, this is not that long of one. This is actually, 36 pages, including maps. Not very long. Several, and some of the tables are just new monsters to add, which again you can find otherwhere. So, Land Beyond the Magic Mirror is a little bit more of a mind trip. Now, that's if your party comes in from Land Beyond the Magic Mirror. This doesn't, I know it doesn't make sense hearing me talk about it, but again, remember, two sides of the same coin. Dungeonland and Land Beyond the Magic Mirror are attached. They're the same area. You can go from one to the other either way. So that's up to you as a dungeon master if you get the both of them to decide how you want to drop them in. Whether they're falling down the pit, the falling through the rabbit hole, seeing the dioramas and getting down to the bottom with the drink me, eat me signs, or they're touching a magic mirror, getting sucked through to some strange, unusual place. Your choice as a dungeon master if you have them both. But yeah, you're talking about they come into the house beyond the magic mirror, and it's actually a modern for 1980s house. Obviously, it's an ancient house by 2020 standards. We're like, oh my God, they got a VHS? What the hell? But yeah, so first and foremost, if adapting this to modern audiences, maybe take some time, go through the text and adapt it to what they would see. Because the expectation is your players are now in a contemporary, real world house as they pass through this magic mirror. You now have your Dungeons and Dragons people running around in a modern era house and all the, but it's magical. Don't let me misrepresent it. It's not like they walk through the portal into Houston, Texas, and they're sitting in a house. It's a representation of a modern house driven by magic. So just so you guys understand that a little bit there. So there's some prep to do here. If you want to keep it in theme of when it was written, you don't have to do as much. But if you don't, then you have to kind of update your descriptions to match a contemporary setting, if you will. So the house is owned by Dr. D.R. Murrayland. Dr. Murrayland. There's lots of little name tweaks and stuff here again, because at the same time, Gaiax was not wanting to get sued because he was always busy suing people for stealing shit. So he tried really hard to make sure that the names were close but not right on. So the Garden of Colossal Fowers is another place you're trying to get the party to get in a fight. Now, this is where Land Beyond the Magic Mirror kind of breaks down as an adventure module. There's not a ton of it. It's not a plot as much as it's a collection of stuff to do. Whereas Dungeonland has kind of a definitive plot where your party starts out getting into the weird area. However they get there, let me find my map again. We'll just pretend here we go. They drop in at A, and they walk through B. When they're going through the little, I don't want to say hedge maze, but when you're using the map as a guide, the ultimate goal is for them to end up over here at H in a fight with the Queen. Or, excuse me, M. In a fight with the Queen of Hearts who had her stolen tarts, right? Everything in the Dungeonland module directly or indirectly propels the party to that point. Land Beyond the Magic Mirror is best called a sandbox experience in regards to there being several, here let's go to their map as well, several strange and unusual things for the party to get involved in. Very few of them are directly connected to themselves as far as a plot. It's like you don't have to do this to do this to do this like you did in Dungeonland. So this is literally the Land Beyond. So if you're looking for good ideas, sandbox items, this might be your preferred choice versus Dungeonland. Dungeonland, you're administering a story and a plot. You're trying to get your people from point A to point C. Land Beyond the Magic Mirror, it's more your party's finding their own trouble and finding their own mystery and having a good time while they do it. So, just bear that in mind between the two. They are connected, different theme. So anyway, the big deal here, just to kind of sum things up, let's see. You've got the walrus, obviously the talking clock, the strange house is a big deal. The Garden of Colossal Flowers, which is there to piss your party off, make them mad, and also tempt them. All right, there you go. And these adventures are just completely full of them. And here's an interesting one. It's like the grassy hill and the chessboard fields. Um, this is something that a party has to, or that a DM has to manage in. It's kind of difficult, or it's easy depending on how easily your group buys into it. So if they go from the house to the garden, they'll see the house on one side and a hill on the other side while they stand in the garden. If they walk towards the house, they will actually get closer to the hill. If they walk towards the hill, they get closer to the house. It's very hard to manage and describe this, but you're trying to get them to walk in the opposite direction of where they want to go. So if they want to go to the hill, they walk towards the house knowing that. So that's one of those little tricks, those mind tricks that you have to be prepared to present to your party, because it's like a joke or magic trick. If you haven't prepared well enough for it and you have to stop and explain this is how it works and this is why it works, it takes a little bit of the fun out of it. It takes a little bit of the ooh, the ah, the mystery out of it. So make sure that you're figuring out in your own way for your particular play group how to do this without sidetracking it, you know. But to go left, you must go right. To go up, you must go to that whole kind of strange thing. So the first major location is the funky house. The second major location, now, this is a little bit thick. The chessboard. The whole, I think if everyone remembers the Alice in Wonderland and the moving chess pieces, hey, thank you. Appreciate you dropping in. Appreciate the follow there. Lots of thanks for it. So the ID here, and let me move this down. And you gotta kind of know chess, okay? Because what's the funniest thing? I don't know if you're a World of Warcraft player as well. The whole Karazhan chess thing. It's been done in a couple different versions. But your party approaches this, and as soon as they land each of these squares, you've got queen, rook, king, pawn, 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 knight, bishop, bishop, pawn, knight. Actually, I should say knight. What's the B? P-P-P-N? Queen. Where's my king? Point being, each of the things that you're looking at here, I don't want to get in too much detail on it, but you can see how there's a dark R, P. Each of these represents a chess piece. And as your party swims across the river through the water to each of these squares, one of them are white marble, the other one's red with, black with fringes on it. However you want to describe it to your party. They actually engage that piece. And once they kill that piece, they are now allowed to move across the chessboard similar to that piece. They become that chess piece. So this gets a little bit of funky here. You're managing a 100-yard wide battlefield, which is 300 by 300 feet. Throw that stat away. We don't want to manage a 300-foot by 300-foot square with just one party and one encounter. We really don't want to do it. Okay. This is where this particular adventure gets very complex, because as the dungeon master, I'm managing a chess game from both sides, but the party's becoming a given piece and managing their own movement, if that makes sense to you. I know I want to move, for example, this pawn's going to go king to knight 6, and you got to remember your 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. You got your 8s and you got your pawn 7, pawn 8, all of that. A lot of chess terminology comes into here. Do you have to use this? Not whatsoever. You could completely chunk it because it's not prevalent to the plot. It's just Land Beyond the Magic Mirrors, a collection, a sandbox, bunch of fun activities that the party can get into. This is neat if you are a chess fan. This is a great encounter if you're good at managing it. If anyone in your party is not into chess, if you don't have at least one person that knows the movements, then don't even mess with this encounter. You'll spend the entire session trying to explain how it's going to work. That's where some of the differences between old content and new content are there. New content, 5th edition, is all about accessibility. We all want our players to be able to, excuse me, from the newest player to the most experienced player, 5th edition is about accessibility. We want everyone to be able to drop in. 1st edition didn't care about that. If you don't know chess, if you don't understand the movement for the game of chess and understand how the things work, half of this module's gone. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. This would be a really good source for that. The magic. Then you've got the buffet table with the hags, and they bring everyone in, and there's this entire. So yeah, there's Land Beyond the Magic Mirrors. Basically, 3 or 4 set piece encounters. You have the Magic Mirror House, which is the first thing that the party's walking through as they see this weird modern stuff. The walrus and the human. They're trying to get over there. The carpenter and the walrus. They're trying to get their pearls and their clams. Instead of clams for the walrus, it's oysters. Tiny little tweaks, but it's the same part of the magic mirror. So the party has the opportunity to go swimming down below speed. Tree and cottage. We have tedium and tedious. Tweedledee and Tweedledum. They've been renamed tedium and tedious. They'll start to stash the party with getting their stuff back from a giant rock. A rock, the big ass gigantic eagle that flies through. So yeah, you've got interactions with Tweedledee-ish, Tweedledum-ish, a gigantic chessboard battle to manage, a possibly friendly interaction with 2 insane brothers, a possibly friendly interaction between a talking walrus and a human, and then some underwater combat, and obviously you have the Jabberwocky that hangs out in this module. I would definitely make sure to use a 5th edition Jabberwocky from, was it Mordenkainen's? But you'll have the access to it. This sounds like something would be good. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Great resource for you, Charlie. The Mad Feast Hall is the next big event. And this is where this becomes a issue for you as a dungeon master to make sure that you're able to manage illusionary effects. The entire Grand Feast, we'll get to the Mad Feast here in a little bit. It's an entire illusionary event. It's completely twisted, and you really got to make sure your party buys into it. Otherwise, it's kind of over. So, whether they enter through the tiny doors as miniatures or gigantic doors, this also connects to Dungeonland. We'll talk about that. It actually is. It talks about that in the Dungeonland module. So, Humpty Dumpty. You have Humpty Dumpty, the giant egg on a wall. As he falls down, all the king's horses and all the king's men will come out to try to put him back together. 24 woolly rhinoceros and 72 frost giants. That's where you see the difference between 1st edition and 5th edition. There is no place in the history of ever, anywhere, that 5th edition is going to put 72 of anything on a party, much less 72 frost giants. It's all an illusion, but still, that's the kind of stuff that the parties were playing with back in the day. All the king's horses and all the king's men come up to put Humpty Dumpty back together again. It's actually an illusion put up by one of the king's men. If the players can deal well with this guy, that's an introduction to the king. More stuff. Nothing driving the plot. Lots of fun activities to do. So I do want to, as I finish up my recording, I'm going to be on Twitch for a little bit longer. I just usually take a pause at about an hour long, go get something to drink, and then kind of open up for free discussions. But yeah, think about it this way. Dungeonland is giving you the plot. Dungeonland is giving you a story. Land Beyond Magic Mirrors is giving you stuff to do around the story. Both of them are connected. Neither of them is dependent on the other. So that was kind of nice to see. A lot of times when you had a series of modules back in the older days, you had to play through the first 2 to understand the third one. This is really like, you'd almost call it like Dungeonland, the story, and Land Beyond, the source book. So on their own, either of them is relatively playable. Dungeonland is more playable because it has a discernible, followable plot. You can pick up at point A, get your party to point F, end the adventure, high five, have lots of fun, go back to the real world. But it's a linear and very DM fiat, I would dare say almost railroading them into certain things for certain things to happen. Land Beyond the Magic Mirror is the dead opposite. Party is free to do what they want. There's repercussions with it. There's no major overreaching plot that says you have to do this, to do this, to do that. So taking the 2 together, man, it's a great combination adventure. Your 5th edition statistics are not going to be that difficult. Most of your things in here are homemade crap anyway for 1st edition. It's not going to be a big deal for you to find a similar thing in 5th edition and drop it in. Shambling Mounds or Shambling Mounds still. 5th edition, 1st edition. A Lamia versus a Lamia Noble. That's up to you. A Centaur, an Ogre Magi. We have those. Most of these monsters we have in 5th edition already. Granted, there's about 700 or 800 monsters that existed from 1st or 2nd that have not made their way to 5th edition yet. Doesn't stop us from taking something similar. When you're a dungeon master and you're going to adapt, when you're looking at adapting old content for new, always go on the side of convenience for yourself. Always go on the side of convenience for yourself. You're probably not going to break an adventure by changing a monster to something easier for you to use or to manage. Number 2, for translating 1st edition, 2nd edition to 5th edition, pay attention to the enemy count. Back in the day, because combat was so lethal, it was lethal both ways. And we talk about how easy it was to kill the players. It was even easier to kill the monsters. So the 1st edition solution was to throw more stuff at you. You can handle 1 red dragon, have 5 red dragons. So pay attention to that when you're using 1st edition, 2nd edition for 5th edition. The number of enemies that are involved in an encounter can be overwhelming due to action economy. So sometimes you got to tweak it down or maybe have them come in a couple waves. Number 2 thing, obviously, is because we're dealing with squares and spaces in 5th edition, a lot of the monster counts just don't work, you know? I remember some rooms the party would walk into a 20-foot by 20-foot room, and immediately 30 skeletons would attack them. Well, 20-foot by 20-foot is 16 squares. 30 skeletons, you don't have room to move. You don't have room to manage that combat. So make sure if you're using 5th edition, especially if you're using a virtual tabletop, a grid system, any of that kind of stuff. I'm going to go ahead and go to my smiling face as we finish this up. But yeah, I'm not finishing. I'm finishing my recording. Just take a pause on my Twitch here. But anyway, 5th edition versus 1st edition. Monster count is huge because we use 5th edition. We use a grid. We use the idea of spacing to move around. And there's an ultimate rule that no creature can end its turn in another creature's square. So if you're using a smaller area, 20-foot by, remember, 10-foot by 10-foot room, that's 4 squares. You know, 20-foot by 20-foot, that's 16 squares. If you have a party of 5, that leaves you 11 squares in a 20-foot room to fill up with monsters. If you drop 11 in there, that's great. You have no more room to move. You're not able to flank. The party's not able to get around. So then we like it and take it down to 4 or 5 monsters. So pay attention to the area of your encounter in comparison to 1st edition monsters when you place them. I promise you, they're going to give you way too many of them. Way too many of them. Okay? So I'm going to close up one last little thing. Let's pretend you are using this book and you want to use it as written. And you're not sure what to do for a Snapdragon. Okay? So this is a quick and easy reference guide. Like I said, it gets me close enough. It's not going to be perfect. Gets me close enough in the moment. A Snapdragon's got an armor class of 7, movement of 6, hit dice of 8. Hit points are 48 each, 2 attacks. Each attack does 2 to 16 and 25% magic resistance. What does that mean in 5th edition? First and foremost, let's start with armor class because it's the first thing. An armor class of 7. Always remember your ideal armor class in 5th edition is 20. Your ideal armor class in 1st edition is 0. So you take 27 minus 20, the listed armor class, minus 20 will give you the 5th edition armor class, or close enough. An armor class 7 creature in 1st edition is going to be an armor class 13 creature in 5th edition. 20, your ideal minus the listed, gives you your actual. And that works with an integer as well. You're going to see an armor class of minus 5. 20 minus 5 equals 25. So a minus 5 1st edition creature's got an armor class of 25 in 5th. Okay, so that's the first thing. Second thing is your movement is considered 12 inches is considered standard in 1st edition, equal to 30 feet of walk. If he's at 6, that means he's only got half, so he's going to have 15 feet of movement. Hit dice are similar to level. If it's got 8 hit dice, that's going to be 8 times 8. We all know what hit dice are. You know, we use them for healing, we use them for combat, whatever. But this is also going to give you your level and your proficiency for your monster. He's got a hit dice of 8. I'm going to divide that by 2 to give me his level. I'm going to divide that by 2 more to give me his proficiency. So this guy now has an armor class of 13, a movement of 15. He's got 8 hit dice. He's going to have a +4 to hit, and he's going to have a +2 on his proficiency. So then on his attacks, he gets 2 attacks, +4 to hit, 2 to 16 damage, 2d8 plus 2d8, and then he gets the +2 on his damage for his proficiency. And I'm done. I'm done. This monster's ready to go. Here, I was doing a piss poor job of showing it here. We'll do it one more time here. I was talking about the math. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Apologies for that. Had the wrong screen up. But yeah, Snapdragon, armor class 7. 20 minus 7 gives us 13. 5th edition armor class is 13. Movement of 6, standard movement is 12, which would give you 30 feet in 5th edition. Half of that would be 15 feet in movement. Hit dice 8. 8 divided by 2 gives me his plus to hit, and gives me his level, and divided again by 2 gives me their proficiency. So he's going to have a +4 to hit and a proficiency, i.e. damage bonus of 2. Hit points are fine. A hit dice of 8. 8 times 8 is anywhere between 8 and 64. So that's what you see when you're looking at 5th edition. You see a number there that's telling you the average hit points, somewhere in those hit dice. Attacks 2. Now we know that because of his level, he's got dividing his hit dice by 2 gives me his attack bonus. +4 to hit on each of these attacks. +2 due to his proficiency to damage. So that damage is 2d8 plus 2. 25% magic resistance. I would basically say he has savings throw advantage on his saves against magic. And that's it. That's done. Boom. Takes a little bit of practice. It's just quick and dirty math. Is that perfect? No. Am I going to swear by it and say that this is the #1 monster? No. But it's good enough to where if you're in a pinch, you didn't get a monster card set up, you can make some numbers close to reality and have that monster in play and be effective for combat. Okay? So, EX1, Dungeonland, EX2, Land Beyond the Magic Mirror, published by the OG, Gary Gygax. They were initially designed to nestle into the bottom of Castle Greyhawk. They since became their own demiplane. Demiplane, I think, is a 5th edition term for it. These exist in their own demiplane. Lots of different rules. There's several spells that do not work. There's several things of DM fiat that you had to pay attention to. But above and beyond, I think these two are excellent source books gathering collections of information to help you run an Alice in Wonderland, Land Beyond the Magic, through the looking glass type of a scenario for your party. I think, combining the two of them are going to give you both direction and content, with the caveat that these things are poorly written. That's a bad way to say it. They're poorly structured. You're going to have to reorganize your notes to make sure that you can get the most out of these. You're going to need to read the modules once or twice to make sure that you understand the flow, and then take your notes so you can have it on hand to run it. Contrary to some of the older modules, you'll have a hard time running this directly out of the book. What I mean by out of the book is if you're not familiar with old modules, you've seen these blue maps here and the outer cover. These were actually printed on the inside of the jacket. This is the back of the book jacket. That's the front of the book jacket. These little blue maps sat inside, and we'd fold them out and have our own little cheesy-ass DM screen. Most modules during the time, you could use the book straight up and go. This is a hard one because the way it was written, you're going back and forth and forth and back and rereading and, oh, wait a minute. Please, please, please. At the risk of being redundant, this is excellent content, but you've got to read it and figure out how to make it work for your group. It's not generic enough to, let me rephrase that. It's unique and unusual in its design to where you're going to have to make adjustments and accommodations for your party. If your party is running without a healer, if no one in your group has got restoration of any way, shape, or form, they will not survive these modules. There are too many status effects that will kick in. If the party doesn't have any way to remove status effects, I don't know how they made it to 10 to begin with, but you're going to have to give them 55 scrolls of restoration or don't even bother doing it, because there's so many confusion spells, command word, suggestions, illusions, poisons, paralyzations, petrifications, polymorph. The whole 9 yards exist as combat encounters, as combat tactics in these modules. If your group can't deal with those well, and no one, we're talking the typical no one wants to play a cleric, no one's got restoration. A lot of what's in these modules will not work. You'll wipe your group with them. So you need to be aware of your group as well as the module to make sure that it all lines up to give you a collaborative experience. But all right, guys over there on YouTube, thank you so much for joining me on this series. Again, we are finishing up the review on Dungeonland and Land Beyond the Magic Mirror, EX1, EX2. Both of them readily available at DM's Guild for legal purchase for free, and I'm sure that some of you more creative people can find other ways to get them. I would always, as a third-party content creator, I would always encourage you to spend the money on it. It's not going to hurt you to spend $2 on a map that you're stealing from me instead. It's not going to hurt you. Yeah, absolutely. Charlie, it was great to be here. I'm actually going to finish up the recording. I just take a pause for a little bit, and then I'll come back and be more than happy to take apart some other stuff. I've got about 14 gigs of old school PDFs from first edition, second edition, and BECME that I love going through. I love talking about that stuff. But YouTube folks, if you've been here for a minute, if you've been here for an hour, thank you so much for sharing your time with me. I'd love to hear back from you. Like, follow, and subscribe. If you have any comments or questions, leave them in the comments. Promise you I'll get back to you on it. Twitch peeps, thanks for saying the same thing. You've been here for 5 minutes. You've been here for the whole time. Thank you for letting me borrow your time with you. I'm going to take a brief break, and we'll be right back. But this is DMGeezerjim signing out on his series, brief introduction to Dungeonland and Land Beyond the Magic Mirror. Thanks a lot, YouTube folks.